Well, friends, we're continuing our summer story time looking at the parables of Jesus, which is very exciting. I'm really enjoying looking at these stories. We talked last week about how they have their earthly stories with a heavenly meaning. And today I'm really excited because we get a maths lesson in our parable. I think I've confessed this before, but I'm a massive nerd. And I don't know how you feel about maths. But I studied primary teaching for a couple of years and I taught grade 6, and I know that for quite a few people maths is that thing that sort of sends a shiver up people's spine. I might be one of those weird people who loves maths, but I know that some people really don't. So if you're one of those people who's like, Karen's talking about maths, it's okay. If you want to completely check out, because I'm going to talk about maths, I'm just going to tell you the key point straight away, and then you can, just do this whole time. It's fine. I understand. The key point is this, guys. The gospel is worth the cost, and Jesus transforms us by his grace. That's what we're going with today. The gospel is worth the cost, and Jesus transforms us by his grace. Now, I wouldn't let maths put you off listening to what, fleshing that out. But if you're really, really put off by maths, I totally understand, because I was that person who tried to convince grade 6s that long division was worth learning, because then I went on and enjoyed doing long division of quadratic equations. Yeah. Anyway, so today we get a basic maths lesson, I think. The maths we're doing today is not very hard. And I think Jesus gives us some sage life advice that you should pay attention and learn to count. Not just, for the sake of the Bible, but also just, as we saw in our excellent kids talk, that actually learning to count is just a basic good life skill to have. Like all Jesus' parables, it's very simple and yet hard to put into practice. And as we saw, if you want to build a tower, first, it's wise to sit down and estimate how much it will cost. Do you have enough materials? Do you have the people who know how to build the tower? These things are all really important. Can you complete the project at hand? I think these things are super, super important. And if you don't have those things, you might end up not actually being able to finish your project. And I feel like we all sort of have a pretty good idea of this given COVID life. And those of you who've been involved with the Jubilee Hall will know particularly, the stress involved in building projects right now. So this part of our parable feels quite real for us, I think. The second half of our parable follows the same principle. However, I'm really hoping that none of us ever have to have any personal experience of this. So if you're a king and you go to war, sit down first and consider whether you can actually win. If not, send a peace treaty. Avert the crisis. It's really great advice. Hopefully not advice that we have to actually take. But here comes our maths lesson. I tried to make maths formulas. Guys, I really leaned into this maths nerdiness this week. So if you're building a tower, there's like X costs and Y costs and Z costs, and hopefully the two sides of the equation balance, otherwise you shouldn't do it. And the same goes for war. If you've got 10,000 men, it's less than 20,000 men, therefore don't go to war. Just really leaned in. But that's not actually the most important bit of our parable today. The crunch comes in verse 33. It says, "In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples." Now this is pretty basic maths. Jesus is saying, do the maths, think it through. Sit down and consider what the cost of following me is. So just like you wouldn't flippantly take on a massive building project with $200 in your pocket, or risk the lives of thousands of people by going to war on a whim, don't follow me without taking it seriously. Now, in this passage, just before the parable, Jesus has set the bar really high for following him. So just before this, he said this. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father or mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." This is the cost. It's high. And Jesus, the disciples of Jesus have to consider this cost. Are they willing to pay the price? Do the maths first. Now, there's something that is helpful to explain in this passage. Jesus mentions you must hate everyone else compared to following him. And this language is quite emotive, isn't it? We hear that and it almost sort of rankles, doesn't it? And it's helpful to understand what he's actually saying here. And in the Greek language, the idea of hate, it's quite a different use of that word than how we would use it. He's not actually saying you hate your family the way we would think of that use of the word. Rather, the way they use it is if you're comparing two things, if you're asked to choose between two things that are both really important. So in this situation, Jesus and your family, or Jesus and your own life, it's the choice. So, you've chosen Jesus, not your family. And so you've chosen Jesus and therefore you hate your family. And so it's not saying you actually hate them the way we would use the word hate. You're saying you're putting Jesus first, and therefore in comparison, you hate those other things, even your own life. And so it's not communicating that those things aren't important. Actually, they are. They're really important. You're choosing between important things. But Jesus is asking us, which will you pick out of these very important things? And he's suggesting, actually, Christ comes first. If we were going to put it in an equation, it would look like this. Following Jesus is greater than friends, family, even your own life. This parable isn't about putting us off following Jesus because the cost is high or it's an impossible task. Rather, it's about when something is so valuable, we give it our full time, our respect, our attention, our love, and actually it's our sacrifice as well. Just like the Jubilee Hall, we thought it was valuable, and so we put in time, attention, love, energy, finance, effort. It took time, didn't it? But we thought it was worth it, and it is. How great is it now? There's a guy called James Edwards. He wrote a commentary on Luke, and he describes it like this. A great building project and going to war all involve high cost, as does following Jesus. Chapter 14 concludes with sober earnestness, not because the gospel is ominous or forbidding, but because, like all things in life of surpassing value, the gospel is both costly and worth cost. True love makes great sacrifices for the beloved and also great demands on the beloved. Now, I feel like this is once again one of those moments in the gospel where Jesus is being really blunt with those around him. The life of discipleship is the best thing you can choose, but it's also the most costly. Nothing else in the world will satisfy like the love of Jesus and also the grace found in him. But Jesus doesn't want half of you or to play second fiddle to other priorities in your life. He wants to be first. And multiple times we actually see in the gospel that people decide that they actually can't accept these conditions and they walk away. Now, we live in a world that understands counting the cost. We know that we have to work hard to achieve. I grew up with phrases like, no pain, no gain. You can be anything you want to be if you set your mind to it. The early bird gets the worm. Now, every generation will have their sort of various phrases like this. But pretty much, I grew up being told, you can do it. You just have to work hard. The Western world understands and values achievement and diligence and working hard to get what we want. And it would be really tempting to view this parable as an encouragement that with enough hard work, I can be the best disciple of Christ simply by working hard enough, because that's what gets us ahead. I can be first. But that's not the full story of the gospel, is it? The gospel is a gospel of grace. Grace that transforms how we look at the requirements asked of us of Christ. Grace changes the maths of discipleship. Jesus asks us to give up everything for him, to put him first, but only because he gave up everything for us first. It's this grace shown to us that changes everything. We see this grace saturated throughout Scripture in how God treats us first. God's grace is greater than our love. God's grace is greater than our effort to succeed. It's greater than our sin. It's greater than our ability to forgive. It's greater than us. God's grace is God's love in action. It's God's grace. That's what makes it possible for us to put Jesus first, for us to count the cost, to carry the cross, to give up everything. And it will be costly. And yet we're filled with this grace. And it makes it possible to walk that narrow road. Not because we've achieved anything, but because Christ transforms us to be more and more and more like him. Now, I love seeing examples of people encountering grace, particularly for the first time. And there's this beautiful example. I'm not sure if you've seen the movie or read the book Les Mis. The title is literally The Miserable Ones. And one summer, I diligently tried to make my way through the book. It's quite an effort. It's a very large book. I sort of succeeded. But the point is that the story of Jean Valjean, it's set in the 1800s in France, is miserable, right? The entire story. There's just gloom after gloom, and yet his story is marked by grace. Right at the start of the story, Jean Valjean is convicted for stealing bread, and he just has this horrible 5 years. You can read the book, watch the movie, and he escapes from prison. And he tries to find someone straight away to take him in, and because he looks wretched and haggard and he's just been in prison, no one will. And so he's walking around this town asking for help, and it's night and he's hungry and desperate. And the only person who will take him in while he's hiding in this church ground is a bishop. This older man, he also is desperately poor. And so this bishop takes him in and feeds him and cares for him when no one else will. This undeserved love and favour in this man's most desperate hour of need. What a moment of grace. Now you think in this moment, aha, grace. This will change his life. Well, it doesn't, actually. Jean Valjean does not change in that moment. In fact, he waits for the household to go to bed, and then he gets up, steals the silverware, and runs away. And he gets caught by the police, and they take him back to the bishop's house. And the police think, aha, he's going to get his just desserts. And Jean Valjean thinks, oh no, I'm going straight back to prison. You can see this look in his face of desperation, of I can't go back to where I've been. And what he encounters next just blows him away. The bishop says, oh, my friend, you left so early. I gave you this gift, but you didn't take what I also had for you. And so he gives him the only thing of value, real value in the house, which is the silver candlesticks. Jean Valjean encounters grace upon grace upon grace. and it changes his life. It's that moment of receiving grace and grace and grace that changes his life. And so the police leave. I'm not sure if they believe this story or not, but the police leave, and the bishop says that his life has been spared by God, and that he should use the money from the silver candlesticks to make an honest man of himself. And it's this profound moment of encountering grace. Grace that changes a life. And you can go and, watch the movie or read the book and see that his life is changed. He encounters grace. Grace that changes a life. It's a transforming grace. And we are offered the most amazing grace, love that is undeserved. Jesus has given us his grace. And what he asks in return is for us to put him first. And it's worth it. It's worth our whole life to put him first. We are asked to count the cost because grace is worth it. Friends, we're going to take some time to pray and consider again the most amazing grace and the offer that we have to put Christ first in our lives. So will you join me as we